Welcome to the Unlocking Victorian Justice podcast series about the 30th anniversary of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. We hope that VALS Justice Yarns will help you learn about the Royal Commission and the urgent work that we must do to end Aboriginal deaths in custody. Please follow our social media, which is linked in the description underneath this recording. And if you'd like to support the work that VALS does, please donate at vals.org.au/donate. That's vals.org.au/DONATE. Welcome everyone today for our first podcast as part of our Unlocking Victorian Justice webinar series. I would like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land that the VALS Preston office is located on, and from where I am recording today. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and future, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who are involved with VALS and more broadly in the fight to achieve justice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Wherever you are listening to this in Australia, you are on unceded land. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. A warning for listeners, we are discussing Aboriginal deaths in custody today, and some of this material, this content will be distressing. We encourage Victorian Mob to call VARS Yarning Safe and Strong hotline on 1800 959 563 if you would like to speak with someone. And also Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people should be aware that this podcast may include the names of deceased persons. I'd like to introduce Aunty Rosemary Roe with us, who is joining us today. She was the aunt, or is the aunt of G.J. Rowe, who died in custody in 1997. She has vowed to hold Western Australian Police and all government agencies accountable for any cruel and inhumane treatment of her 11-year-old nephew. She was brought up in Carnarvon and identifies as Yamaji, but has connections also to the Yawuru people in Broome and the Margana people in Shark Bay. Her family is still investigating her connections on her mother's side, as her mother was a member of the Stolen Generation and was sent to the Moore River Native Settlement. Aunty Rosemary, thank you very much for joining us today, and welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to be a part of the 30th anniversary since the Aboriginal Death in Custody recommendations were handed down. Thank you for the opportunity to share our story. And this is coming from how the treatment of youth back in 1997, which is approximately 24 years ago. It's a great opportunity to be able to share where we are today, what happened yesterday to where we are today, and what changes have been made or haven't been made.
Rosemary, I just want to really acknowledge your generosity in coming today and speaking about this incredibly tragic set of circumstances, and I appreciate that it's difficult to talk about this subject, and I think it's really important for all of our listeners to not only listen today, but then to also take steps to support those families whose loved ones have died in custody. Aunty Rosemary, you also have joined the NATSL's Stop Black Deaths in Custody campaign. Would you be able to speak to that a little bit? Why did you make the decision to join this campaign?
Yeah, I first joined as part of the families that had their loved ones die in custodial spaces. And then a position became available. So it was great to actually be with a group of families and share and grieve together. And this position for campaigner role came up, and I decided I'd apply for it. I was going to be just on the interview panel, but I thought maybe a great opportunity to apply for the position, and it was advertised nationally, and shortlisted, and myself and a young lady and Butcher were successful applicants, and we share the position. So we have the younger generation with the older generation, and both experience families that have died in custody.
And can you please explain to our audience today why it's important that the family members and the affected communities are involved in campaigning in this space and pushing for reforms?
Yeah, because like we grieve all our life, and we have to share our beliefs in what's not happening within the system. It's got to come from the families, and each family are individuals and separate. We have our own opinions on how our loved ones died, and like what went wrong within that system, the colonial system, and even in your community, what went wrong with assisting our family members. And so it's important to hear different families share, and then we come to common points, and a lot of it leads back to the Royal Commission recommendations, why, if they were implemented 30 years ago, then we wouldn't be speaking today about our loved ones' deaths, or there'd be less incarceration rates. So, yeah, very important that we came together. And there are a lot of other families that need voices too, that we need to get the correct list, and families that are not being heard or want to be a part of it. And they have to be, because it's over 400 plus deaths since the Royal Commission. There are also deaths happening during the Royal Commission. So we are the voices for those that are not heard as well, but they have their own voice. We need to bring them in. So it's part of their grieving to be able to speak their minds, basically, because you never stop grieving. The longer it takes, the more easy it becomes, but it'll never, ever, it's still a part of you, the tragic circumstances behind the deaths of loved ones.
Rosemary, are you able to share with us the story of your family and what happened with your nephew?
Last Tuesday, we had a reporter in, and he did a little interview, well, a big interview actually, it was huge, just to lift off our emotions and that, and share our story. I involved my sister because she's here from the country, the mother of the child, and it was fantastic for her to be here and share with myself our journey. It was an opportunity for my sister to actually take over and say her piece, and this is the first time in 24 years that I've heard her, and she was so strong about it. She's sort of like the mother figure of the whole family. But my nephew, it sort of started when he was 7. So in the background, you had my sister had her children early in life, so a young mother. And along with that comes a lot of, social issues, especially in small country towns. There was issues with racism for a start. Like, no one's perfect in this world, and we all live and breathe the same air. What happened was I think he was targeted, really. There was a Young Offenders Act that was coming out at the time, in West Australian Young Offenders Act, and this young lad was only 11. He actually was targeted too much in the last 6 months of his life, and we were there. My sister and I were there, and we saw it, and we, basically were spending our time at either the Aboriginal Legal Service or the local courthouse or the police station, and the odd welfare and the education. So he had an older brother that sort of spent like 25 to 43 years of his life in and out of juvenile and adult detention centres. So there was something wrong with the system there, for a person to be spending that long in and out of prison. But we forgot about the younger boy, because we were too busy trying to keep the older chap out. In the end, they were treating the young boy identically as the older boy, and his last 6 months of his life was, total misery. He, he couldn't wear his little rollerblades down the street. He had a really good heart. He looked after his little cousins, the little female ones. He loved football, basketball, cricket. He loved his pets. He had, pet cats and a dog, and made cubby house. It was just being a child, and just wanted to live and experience life as a young child. But you had some of the police officers were really going overboard and doing stuff. And in the coronial inquest findings, it says officers should not use batons on children, which happened. One of the officers went into the house. They'd go into our home without a warrant, 2 or 3, maybe 4, especially when adults weren't home as well. So they got away with a lot of breaching of their duty of care, actually. He went to, so everything he had, a bike, anything they'd find on him, they'd take him to the police station and think it was stolen or confiscated. Then, he was getting kicked out of school. He'd walk home with his head down. He may have been having problems at school, but there was a lot of support networks there. And a lot of them were our own Aboriginal police officers, APLOs, which I think West Australia don't have them anymore. There's maybe just one that's hanging on to her position. But these people failed our family, the Indigenous side, because they were all in the positions to help. They failed big time, actually. So there was a couple of burglary charges they tried to put on him. I spoke to my nephew the other day, who's a couple of years older, and he said they just walked through a derelict house. It was just, no one was living it. It was unlivable, and kids would be kids. They'll just wander around, look around, and I think they tried to have a burglary charge on him from that incident. And out of the 3 or 4 boys that were there, he was the only one arrested and taken. Another incident, he walked through one of the high school. We all cut through our local high school to get to our destination behind. And that was another attempt burglary or something. And we were so concerned that it may have, 3 strikes and you're in law. And being the age he was at the time, it was just a baby, and they are at 10, 11, right up, their brains are still developing up until they're 25, I believe. We were fearing, his mother and I were fearing that they'd give the 3 strikes and you're in, and he'd get 12 months automatic sentence into a juvenile detention centre, which in our town was 900 k's away to the city. And just seeing what the older boy went through, he wouldn't have survived it because of, city life is faster than country life. In the country was more laid back and not as on the move. So it was a Friday night, and the police actually put a curfew on him. Every night he was home asleep in his bed. It wasn't though he's walking around doing stuff. He did that during the day, but he'd always make sure he'd be home at night time, and he was. So in the end, the police imposed a curfew on him. He had to be at home at night, and it was a Friday night, and the local PCYC, run by the police and the Aboriginal police aides, they were having their roller skate night, and he loved roller skating because one of his uncles, who was a police aide, actually gave him a set of roller skates, and they were confiscated off him, thinking they were stolen. So this is a lot of the pressure this poor kid was going through in the last 6 months of his young life. So we looked around everywhere because it was like getting on to 7 o'clock, and we ended up finding out that he could have went out to the PCYC. And so my sister found him there and took him home, and he was so upset because he was mixing with kids his own age, enjoying the music, enjoying the balance, and, you know, cruising around and just mixing with his kids, that on occasions he was kicked out of school, that there was a good meeting place, you know, where they can have fun. So my sister brought him home, and he just went straight into his room and locked the door. My mum was there, and like I was saying, she was a school teacher and loved teaching kids, and she was in the house at the same time, and we had to go out for like 5 to 10 minutes. And when Sue came back, she knocked on the door to see if he was okay, and there was no answer. And she opened the back window, and she was the first on the scene to see her child unresponsive. Then her de facto at the time had to jump through, and we called our younger brother across the road, and, you know, he had to try and do the CPR and all this. So some of the questions the reporter asked during our interview during last week was like, you know, how did you find the young lad? You know, what did you see? And she brought it out. I let her speak, and she said she saw him in a kneeling position. So he actually took his own life by hanging from his ceiling fan, and he had a what do you call it, a bed that was given him from the DCP. It was a what do you call it, double bunker. So it was too high and too close to the ceiling, and, you know, that plays up on my nerves too. You know, it was an incentive they gave him to be good, but in the end, that incentive was part of, you know, reaching across and doing what he did. But yeah, it's just totally sad. And when I was told about it when I came home, and all I seen was just ambulance and police lights all around your house, and you never forget it. And it takes years, like, to the impact of and lights of sirens and that, you know, it's the mental health behind what happened to our nephew. Yeah, so, and for years we couldn't wear anything around our neck, you know, like scarves or necklaces. That's how it affected me personally. The room where it happened, his bedroom, you know, no one would go in there for months. It was always kept locked. And then just the door was shut. And he had a little pet cat that, you know, cats pick up on things, and the cat would not go into the room. He'd just walk past the door and up and down the door. But my sister stayed in the house for a while after, and then she ended up working for the Aboriginal Medical Centre. So she did training with the local Marmudich, which is in Perth here, and to become like a registered a health worker. So she gave back to the community by helping people, and she's been in the job like 11 years plus, you know. The older son that's went through the system before the young boy, you know, he's mentally distraught by the system and being in prison most of his life, and we have to worry about him now, you know. We managed to get him out of prison, but for some it's too late. Their mental health is totally gone. In a well, he's just so different. He's aged, and we're just fearing that, you know, if he doesn't get the help or strength that he needs, that we just worry every day, basically. Up until today, you know, I'm going to call her today and see what's happening. But yeah, that's basically how it happened. And a lot of the kids in the town, you know, are totally traumatized. We really haven't had counselling. I have, because I moved from the town to the city. But this is good that the ABC that my sister's able to tell her story finally and share with the rest of the families. You know, we've had young boys and all these young kids now passing away, and especially in WA. We need to make big time changes. Yeah.
Auntie Rosemary, I don't really know how to express how sorry I am for your family's loss. Your nephew was so young, and it just sounds like he had such a difficult time. And I guess, you know, in asking you to share your story with us today, I'm just really mindful that so often families are asked to share their stories and then they don't necessarily see the changes or the justice they want actually transpire. And I think it would be really useful for everyone who's listening to this today to know, what would you like to happen from here? What sort of changes would you like to see so this sort of thing doesn't happen to any other child and any other family?
Yeah, the more community networking, you know, all the resources were there and they just needed to help to bring it together. Because if you've got a community, you know, bring all the resources together and help another child. Like in the same town, we were only speaking last night, that some of the kids now are like age 5 to 7 on the street. Now that country town needs to really help these children and then help their parents along the way to help their children. We've lost about, when I look at it, 2 or 3 generations in these last 30 years. Since the Royal Commission, you know, just I'm looking at the big picture of what I can see through my experience and through working and up until now where I am now on a national level. Children shouldn't be imprisoned at all or put on curfews. It's house arrest, basically. He was on house arrest, and you just see through overseas people, some of the politicians, you know, they get put on house arrest. You don't put a child on house arrest. And police shouldn't keep having that power to do it. Well, question is, well, what powers do people have, and who are abusing those powers? I'd like to see the age for, you know, incarceration that raised, even up to 16 plus, or even 18, or not at all. Just have a separate section where they can help the children. And also some of these people that actually assaulted my nephew with a baton and things like that. You know, the story's been told now. It's what we can do about it. The family will be discussing our rights and any further action, because it takes so long for the grieving, the different stages of the grieving, that you can't think straight. And people come up like week within your death and you're not thinking straight. You take ages, and you feel really, you feel for all the different families that have had death in custody and the process they have to go through. And it's just, as I said, 24 years since we've had this opportunity to share his story, and it's made us stronger. And hopefully it doesn't make us targets either, because we want to change the system for the betterment of everyone, every nationality that lives on Aboriginal land, because as we say, our sovereignty wasn't ceded. It's time to listen to the elders now, people to respect the elders and come together on how we can lower the incarceration rates, lower the death in custodies, and educate the wider community, including our own families, you know, because a lot of our siblings don't know the full story, even of the stolen generation. Now, we carry that trauma from what Mum went through. So when you look at that picture, her mum was taken as a 7-year-old from inland near Leonora, central Western Australia, and taken to that Moorooba native settlement. And so Mum was actually born there on the settlement. So her mother and her sister are buried there. But my siblings don't know that story yet. Until we can do Mum's autobiography and finish that, then we can move on to the injustices that went along, because she was also part of the stolen wages, being a school teacher, you know. It's like, look back at history, colonisation, and where we are today, and the impact it has on us. So that's the journey we're on at the moment, and it's great to do it with all the other families. Yeah.
I think what you've said is so insightful and so important. But when we're talking about change and reform, understanding Australia's violent colonial history has to be a part of that, and recognising the foundations of this country and the way our criminal legal system, police, courts, prison systems have all treated Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people throughout the centuries, and how we've gotten to where we are today, and to understand how that history informs over incarceration rates and informs how these systems operate. And because we're coming up to the 30-year anniversary, Aunty Rosemary, I'd be keen to get your views on, you know, how do you feel and how does your family feel about the fact that 30 years on from that Royal Commission report that handed down this, you know, blueprint for transforming the legal system, the fact that those recommendations haven't been implemented yet, how does that make you feel?
Totally angry, saddened. I feel very embarrassed of the governments, the colonial settlers and the governments that didn't implement them when there was, you know, I mean, it cost a lot of money to do the Royal Commission, and my cousin, Dr. Helen Corbett, was instrumental in making that happen, you know, lobbying to state, federal and international groups to the Royal Commission and investigate the 99 deaths, and not one person has been accountable or been found to be a part of that death. So there's a lot of people out there that's doing some horrific stuff to our people and getting away with it. So, I mean, I can get really angry because my nephew fell victim of the system, and my older nephew, along with 3 or 4 in between. But I've managed to support to get them out and given them a chance. We've changed a few, you know, wrote a few letters, and hopefully, like, families can get together, and we really need to do class actions, I believe, or even maybe go to the International Court of Justice, because I believe there's continued acts of genocide and war crimes still happening. They had 30 years to make changes, and 200 years before that. It's time now to stop and listen to our real issues here, and the issue with land as well. You know, don't sell off our land. If we had a house and our land back, you know, some people do have it, but people from the stolen generation who can't trace family back, well, they need to either give us some land back so we can do programs. Instead of prisons in the city, and there's about 9 or 10 in the Noongar, you know, the Noongar area in Perth. You know, what was the intention there, to have so many prisons? And they're still building prisons. Now, we've got a lot of mental health and a lot of drug addiction. I'm so angry, and I'm sure a lot of the families that had recent deaths in custody in those past 30 years will agree, you know, and a lot of them are still learning about all this, coming from country towns. You know, you live a different life, you speak a different language, you mix with different people, but in the city you get to know people and their positions and what they do, only if you're on committees and stuff. And I've only been back involved for two years. So this is with the First Nations Death and Custody Watch Committee in Perth. and I've learned a lot, and I haven't seen much changes. I mean, there are some, but not enough. Yeah. So a lot of anger and a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear, and we're strong enough as adults, but we're also targets. And the kids, we fear for their safety as well. That's all ages. Men, women, child, LGBTQ, the community. But we have to stand strong together because our ancestors are with us and support us, and they actually guide us to where we are. Like even with myself, I know my ancestors are guiding me. My nephew that's just released from prison, although he's in a bad way, he knows that his ancestors are guiding him. But we're only a body, our body does shut down and we're not here forever. But while we're on this earth, we have to help one another to live together, and make some changes, positive changes, so people are not living in fear, and educate each other, because a lot of people don't know what's happening since colonisation. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think, I can feel your anger and your hurt. And I think it's difficult also, but important as a non-Aboriginal person to hear about the fear that your community feels. But I think you've also very generously, offering an opportunity to work together, welcoming the solidarity of non-Aboriginal Australians to join in this fight for justice. And I can see that you also see a lot of hope for the future if we all come together. Aunty Rosemary, is there anything else in particular you would like to end on? Anything you haven't touched on today that you want to let the audience know? We'll have both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening in, and also non-Aboriginal people living in Australia.
Yeah, it's important that we respect the custodians of the land that we're all sharing and living on, and that's any country in throughout the world, and it's and then look after Mother Earth by doing that. Yeah, we just need to come together and live in harmony. Listen to our elders, mostly the Indigenous ones here in Australia, because we're like, our age is now, our life expectancy is even lower, and we have to look after these children. The government need to take notice, and like we've written to the Prime Minister and hoping to meet with him in June. That should be great if it happens, and these podcasts and stuff that are coming out, and people, hopefully they can tune in and listen to stories, and just people that are like, who think they're so supreme, like, stop that attitude, because we're all humans, and they should be happy they're living in Australia, and Australia's a beautiful country. Yeah, let's all come together.
Thank you, Aunty Rosemary, for being so generous and taking the time to speak with us today, and to share your story, your family's story, your nephew's story. And we'll also make sure to share the asks of the families who are campaigning to stop Black deaths in custody, because it's absolutely critical that we listen to those voices, and we centre those voices. And I know there'll be lots of people listening today who will be spurred to action and will want to know what to do. And we'll make sure we share those asks. And also, I know there's a petition going around, so the Prime Minister meets with the families. All right, well, thank you once again, and I wish you the best of luck in your continued fight for justice for your family and for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people around this land.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you.
Dear listener, if you're still with us, thank you for listening. Please check out our other podcasts in the Royal Commission anniversary series, VALS Justice Yarns. And a reminder to follow us on social media and donate to VALS if you want to support our work. The links are below in the description. And of course, wherever you're listening to this podcast from, across this land, sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land.